It is 14:42 local time in Paris. On runway 26, right at Charles de Gaulle Airport, Air France Flight 4590 accelerates toward the sky in the most elegant commercial aircraft ever built, the Concorde. In exactly 2 minutes and 5 seconds, this symbol of French engineering will become a ball of fire that will fall upon the city of Gonesse, taking with it not only 113 lives, but also the future of commercial supersonic aviation. The Concorde was not simply an airplane, it was a masterpiece of aerospace engineering. Born from Franco-British collaboration in the 1960s, this bird of fire could fly at Mach 2.04, that is, 2,180 kilometers per hour, more than twice the speed of sound. At 60,000 feet altitude, where the sky appears purple and Earth's curvature is visible, the Concorde reigned supreme over all other commercial aircraft. The development of the Concorde had begun in 1962, when France and Great Britain decided to join forces to create the world's first commercial supersonic aircraft. Its first flight took place on March 2, 1969, and commercial service began in January 1976. For 24 years, the Concorde had operated without a single fatal accident, establishing an incomparable safety record in commercial aviation. Air France Flight 4590 on that Tuesday, July 25, 2000, was no different from hundreds of other Concorde flights. The assigned aircraft was F-BTSC, built in 1975 with 25 years of impeccable service. On board traveled 100 German passengers, mostly affluent retirees who had paid more than 8,000 euros each for the privilege of flying at the speed of sound to New York, where they would board the MS Deutschland cruise ship for a 16-day journey through the Caribbean. Commanding the flight was Captain Christian Marty, 54 years old, with 13,477 flight hours in his career. Marty was considered one of Air France's best Concorde pilots, known for his technical precision and calm under pressure. Flying as co-pilot was Jean Marcot, 50 years old, with 10,853 hours of experience, also an experienced Concorde veteran. It was a hot summer Tuesday in Paris, with a temperature of 20 degrees Celsius and perfect flying conditions. At Charles de Gaulle Airport, operations proceeded normally. The Concorde F-BTSC had arrived the previous night from New York, and technicians had completed routine checks without finding any anomalies. At 13:00, passengers began the boarding process at the exclusive Concorde terminal. It wasn't simply standing in line and boarding the plane, it was a ceremony. Complimentary champagne in the VIP lounge, photographs next to the world's most famous aircraft, and the palpable excitement of being about to experience something very few humans had lived, flying faster than a rifle bullet. The passengers were mainly elderly German couples, many celebrating wedding anniversaries or fulfilling a lifelong dream. Among them traveled Heinrich and Irene Herfurth, married for 43 years, who had saved for a decade for this trip. Also on board were Brigitte and Hans Hopfner, celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary with this supersonic flight. For all of them, this was not simply transportation, but the adventure of their lives. But on runway 26 right, something had changed since the last takeoff. At 14:14, exactly 28 minutes before the Concorde's departure, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10 from Continental Airlines had departed bound for Newark. During taxiing to the runway, a small metal piece 43 centimeters long had detached from the DC-10's thrust reverser and fallen onto the runway. The titanium alloy metal strip weighed only 29 grams, approximately the thickness of a sheet of paper. For any other commercial aircraft, this small piece would have been completely insignificant, possibly causing only minor noise when passing over it. But for the Concorde, with its high-pressure tires and unique fuel tank design, this fragment would become the trigger for a tragedy that would change aviation history. At 14:40, Charles de Gaulle Control Tower transmitted the authorization that would seal the flight's fate. Air France 4590, runway 26 right, cleared for takeoff. The controller's voice was routine, professional. It was the 15th Concorde departure of the day from Charles de Gaulle. No one could imagine it would be the last. The Concorde, loaded with 185 tons total weight, near its maximum limit, began its takeoff run. To reach the necessary speed of 400 kilometers per hour over a distance of 3,400 meters, the four Rolls-Royce Olympus engines roared with a combined power of 68,000 kilos of thrust, a sound so distinctive that residents near the airport could identify a Concorde takeoff with their eyes closed. At 14:42 and 31 seconds, when the Concorde had reached a speed of 278 kilometers per hour, the right front tire of the main landing gear passed directly over the metal strip left by the Continental DC-10. The impact instantly cut the tire, sending a 4.5 kilogram rubber fragment at 140 meters per second toward the Concorde's right wing. The tire fragment did not directly pierce fuel tank number 5. Instead, the massive impact created what engineers call a hydrodynamic shockwave that traversed the tank like an invisible tsunami. The force was so intense, it caused a rupture more than 1 meter long in the tank's upper section. Within seconds, aviation fuel began spilling at a rate of 20 liters per second. With more than 90 tons of highly flammable fuel aboard, the leak represented a mortal danger. But there was no fire yet. For agonizing 20 seconds, the Concorde continued accelerating down the runway while a stream of fuel extended behind the right wing like a deadly liquid wake. At 14:42 and 54 seconds, a spark, probably generated by the retracting landing gear or the engine's hot exhaust, ignited the massive fuel leak. A 60-meter flame instantly extended behind the Concorde's right wing, creating an image that would be forever etched in aviation history. The world's most elegant aircraft transformed into a flying torch. In the flight deck, alarms began sounding simultaneously. "Fire in engine 2!" shouted flight engineer Gilles Jardinot. Captain Marty, with decades of experience, responded immediately, "Shutting down engine 2." But the fire wasn't really in the engine. It was the fuel spilling from tank number 5 that was burning beneath the wing. At that critical moment, the Concorde had reached a speed of 328 kilometers per hour, still below V1, the decision speed for takeoff. Technically, Captain Marty could still abort takeoff, but with visible fire and more than 3,000 meters of runway already consumed, the decision wasn't simple. In a split second that would define the next 90 seconds, Marty decided to continue with takeoff. By extraordinary coincidence, multiple cameras captured the final moments of Air France Flight 4590. A Japanese tourist, Toshihiko Sato, was filming aircraft near the airport with his video camera when he saw the Concorde approaching with the massive flame. A security camera at the Kiryat Hotel had a perfect view of the runway. But the most iconic image was captured by Wolfgang Müller, a German professional photographer who shot a sequence of photographs that would become world famous. At 14:43 and 13 seconds, with a 60-meter flame extending behind the right wing, the Concorde laboriously lifted off the ground. The image was surreal and terrifying. The most elegant symbol of commercial aviation, now transformed into a flying torch, fighting against the laws of physics to gain altitude. Black box recordings revealed growing desperation in the cockpit. "Watch the airspeed, the airspeed, the airspeed," shouted co-pilot Marco in English, the standard language for emergencies. "I'm trying," responded Captain Marty. The aircraft's speed was barely 200 knots, well below the 300 knots normal for a newly departed Concorde. The fire was not simply visible, it was destructive. The flames reached temperatures of 1,800 degrees Celsius, enough to melt aluminum. Control cables in the right wing began failing one by one. Engine number 1, though not directly on fire, began losing power due to extreme heat and debris ingestion. At a maximum altitude of barely 200 feet, less than the height of a 20-story building, the Concorde desperately struggled to stay airborne. But physics was relentless. With 2 of 4 engines compromised and the right wing structurally damaged, the aircraft began losing lift. At 14:44 and 5 seconds, Captain Marty uttered words that would be forever recorded in aviation history. "It's coming down on us!" The Concorde began banking violently to the right, entering a descending spiral from which there would be no possible recovery. The final seconds were captured live by cameras. The Concorde, with its elegant silhouette now distorted by the massive flame, banked more and more until its nose pointed directly at the ground. The last words recorded in the cockpit were a desperate cry from Captain Marty. "Damn it, we can't! It's coming down on us!" At 14:44 and 31 seconds, exactly 2 minutes and 5 seconds after takeoff, Air France Flight 4590 crashed into the Hotelissimo Hotel in the city of Gonesse, only 8.5 kilometers from Charles de Gaulle Airport. The fireball was visible from 20 kilometers away, and the explosion felt like a minor earthquake within a radius of several kilometers. The 109 people aboard the Concorde died instantly, along with 4 hotel employees who were at the impact site. The impact temperature was so intense, it melted nearby road asphalt, and the aircraft remains were completely unrecognizable. Emergency teams arrived in less than 4 minutes, but there was nothing they could do to save lives. 200 firefighters fought for 3 hours to completely control the fire consuming the hotel and aircraft remains. The magnitude of destruction was total. The Concorde, built to fly at more than 2,000 kilometers per hour, had been reduced to twisted metal fragments. Images of the burning Concorde were instantly transmitted worldwide through 24-hour television networks. It was more than an air accident. It was the symbolic end of an era. The aircraft that had represented the future of commercial aviation, that had carried presidents, movie stars, and industry captains across the Atlantic faster than a bullet, had fallen from the sky in flames before the entire world's eyes. Within hours, Air France shares fell 12% on the Paris Stock Exchange. British Airways immediately suspended all Concorde flights for the first time in 24 years of service. The world's safest commercial aircraft, which had completed more than 200,000 flights without a single fatal accident, had lost its aura of invincibility in less than 2 minutes. The investigation by France's Bureau of Investigation and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, known as BEA, began immediately. Investigators found the DC-10 metal strip on the runway within the first hours. Black boxes were recovered intact from the accident site, providing a complete recording of cockpit events. The investigation revealed a tragedy of small failures that had combined perfectly to create catastrophe. The DC-10 piece shouldn't have been on the runway. Inspection procedures should have detected it. The Concorde's tires, though functioning within specifications, had a history of occasional blowouts. The fuel tank design made them vulnerable to shock waves from external impacts. After 15 months of extensive modifications, including new Kevlar-reinforced tires, fuel tanks with protective lining against shock waves, and improved runway inspection procedures, the Concorde returned to service in November 2001. But the world had changed. The September 11th terrorist attacks had completely transformed the airline industry. Luxury tourism had dramatically decreased, and public confidence in the Concorde never fully recovered. The economic numbers were relentless. Before the accident, Air France operated 5 Concordes with an average occupancy of 80%. After service resumption, occupancy fell to less than 50%. Concorde operating costs were astronomical. Each flight required 19 tons of fuel just to reach New York, compared to 8 tons for a subsonic flight. On April 10, 2003, Air France and British Airways simultaneously announced they would permanently retire their Concorde fleets. On October 24, 2003, the last commercial Concorde flight landed at London Heathrow, marking the definitive end of the commercial supersonic era. The Air France Flight 4590 accident forever changed runway maintenance protocols at airports worldwide. Inspection procedures became more rigorous, with mandatory checks after each takeoff and landing. Fuel tank designs incorporated new technologies to resist shock waves. Emergency procedures were revised to give crews better tools for handling situations like the one Captain Marty faced. But the greatest legacy of Flight 4590 was demonstrating that even the most advanced and proven technology is vulnerable to unforeseen consequences of apparently minor failures. A 29-gram piece of metal had ended the dream of flying commercially at the speed of sound. In aviation museums worldwide, 18 Concordes remain as silent monuments to human ambition and technology's limits. At the Air and Space Museum at Le Bourget near Paris, Concorde F-BTSS is displayed as a reminder of both the triumph and tragedy of supersonic aviation. Today, more than 2 decades later, new companies like Boom Supersonic work on the next generation of commercial supersonic flight, incorporating lessons learned from the Concorde and the Flight 4590 tragedy. Modern engineers study every detail of that July Tuesday, every decision made in the cockpit, every second captured by cameras, to ensure that when humanity returns to flying commercially faster than sound, it does so safely. Air France Flight 4590 taught us that progress comes with inherent risks, but also that every tragedy, however devastating, makes us wiser, more careful, more determined that the skies be safe for all who dream of flying. The 113 lives lost in Gonesse were not in vain if their legacy lives in every safety improvement, in every new design, and in every future flight that arrives safely at its destination. In the blue sky over the Atlantic, the distinctive supersonic roar of the Concorde is no longer heard. But in aerospace engineering laboratories worldwide, the dream of flying at the speed of sound remains alive, now tempered by wisdom born from tragedy and strengthened by determination that never again will a small piece of metal determine the fate of so many innocent lives.